Dallas.
The
Well,
big E.
well, let's get started at 7:05. Thank you all for being here. We are so excited to get to talk about the Kathleen Kent's The Dime. If you don't know me, but you got an email from me, my name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas here in Dallas. And together with Gemini Ink and David Samuel Levinson, whose book we read was our initial book for the Big Texas Read, we put together this this kind of virtual statewide reading club, and we're so happy that you're here. I want to introduce Alexandra Vandekamp from Gemini Ink down in San Antonio. She's going to tell you a little bit about Gemini Ink, and then I'll introduce David, I'll introduce Kathleen, and we'll be off to the races.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, I just want to say it's so great to be here. Is this our 5th session of the Big Texas Read? I think it is.
Yes.
Fifth session.
And I'm just thrilled to welcome Kathleen Kent. I mean, we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center, and we've all been kind of pivoting and adjusting to this new normal. And one great thing has been this virtual statewide book club, which never would have happened without Blake getting in touch with me and David. And I love the idea that we're bringing these great authors into your homes. So it is a silver lining in otherwise difficult times. And that's what Geminink's all about. Check us out, www.geminink.org. We're not a tattoo parlor. I know sometimes people we get that question a lot, but
that's funny. I've never thought about that.
Yeah. We've been around for 27 years, and just writing workshops, literary conversations like this one, and I'm just psyched to be here.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Alexandra. Well, David Samuel Levinson is going to be our moderator tonight, and we read his book, Tell Me How This Ends Well, for our first session of the Big Texas Read. And if you don't know David, he's great. He's the author of the novel Antonia Lively Breaks the Silence. He's got a great story collection called Most of Us Are Here Against Our Will. And then, of course, if you missed Tell Me How This Ends Well, you should pick it up from Interrobang Books or Twig, the Twig bookshop down in San Antonio. I should also mention that all of our books, you know, we've partnered with the Twig bookshop in San Antonio and also Interrobang Books here in Dallas. You can order from them online, just like Amazon, but better because you're supporting local bookstores. We are joined tonight by Kathleen Kent. We are really lucky that we get to discuss the first 2 books in the Betty Reesick series. First, The Dime tonight, and then The Burn 2 weeks from now. But Kathleen Kent is the author of the Edgar Award-nominated The Dime, as well as 3 best-selling historical novels, The Heretic's Daughter, The Traitor's Wife, and The Outcasts. And save, I guess, a stint in New York City, Kathleen lives here in Dallas. So welcome, Kathleen. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
Glad to be here.
So, Kathleen, do you want to give us a little wind up of The Dime, please?
Sure. So, The Dime is the first of the Detective Betty Reesick series. And it was a bit of a departure for me. I had written 3 works of historical fiction and was kind of challenged to write a contemporary crime novel. And The Dime was the result of that first effort. And it's about a detective who's with the NYPD. She's with the narcotics department, and she leaves with her partner to move from Brooklyn to Texas. And it's quite a culture shock for her. It's a galaxy far, far away. And in great part, the first book is her coming to terms with dealing with the way things are in Texas, culturally, the way the police department is structured differently. And so she says goodbye to the only life she's ever known. She's a born and bred New Yorker. She's from a family of cops. And one of the people in her family that has the most, that was the most important to her was her Uncle Benny. And as she's leaving New York to move to Dallas, she stops in Florida where her Uncle Benny has moved to retire, and he's dying of cancer. So this is her goodbye to him. And they're kind of coming to terms with the end and their family history. So this is just a few pages from the dime. He had been sleeping when I entered the room. Someone had covered him with a thin sheet up to his chin. His face glistened with the dew of a morphine sweat. One arm lay on top of the sheet, and the IV, threaded into a prominent vein on his hand, had backed up with blood. The bag hanging overhead was flaccid, empty of fluid. Before ringing for the nurse, though, I traced one finger gently over his knuckles. He stirred and opened his eyes. He smiled. "Betty," he said. I leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Benny, how are you doing?" "As you see." He inhaled raggedly and grimaced. I reached for the call button. "Are you in pain?" He stopped me. "Not too bad yet. Talk to me a while. Once they dose me, I won't know you from Eve." He began to shiver, and I found a blanket and tucked in the edges like he was a child. I pulled up a chair at the bedside and took his hand in mine. "You got the paperwork taken care of?" he asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "I leave for Dallas tomorrow." He smiled. "You gonna get a horse?" I laughed. "The only horse I ever plan to ride is the coin-operated pony outside of Nearguards." "You still running?" he asked. "Every day. 7 miles yesterday, 6 this morning." Benny stared at me for a long while. "You look good, Betty. Grown into those long legs and wild red curls of yours. Just don't expect things to be any different in Texas. You end up with the same shit on the bottom of your shoes you'd pick up on Franklin or any other street." "I know, Ben. And don't take any crap from the yahoos." My uncle privately called any cop outside of New York or Jersey a yahoo. But I hadn't been too worried about the Texas cops. That is to say, I knew I was going to get crap. My biggest challenges had come from my own family members, many of them cops, who could dish out crap with the best of them. I bobbed my head once. "Right." "Okay," he nodded back, done with his lecture. "How's Jackie?" I smiled gratefully at him. He was the only one in my family who had ever mentioned her name. "She's good. We have an apartment lined up." I rolled my eyes. "She's already house hunting." He wagged a finger at me. "Take my word for it, she'll be wanting Rugrats next." His gaze drifted to the St. Michael medallion hanging around my neck. "Your mom would be so happy to know you wear it. You're the third Rizik woman to have that medal." I made a face. "Yeah, but probably first one to wear tactical boots." "Don't you believe it," he says. "In World War II, the Germans on the Eastern Front used to carry cyanide pellets in case they fell into the hands of the female Polish resistance fighters. You come from a long line of fierce Kobietki." Grimacing, he pressed his free hand over his chest and breathed rapidly as though he was racing the devil. "Christ," he said. His breathing slowed after a moment, and he turned his head to me. "Look me in the eye and tell me you're happy." "I'm happy, Benny." "Good," he said. "That's good. You know, your dad at one time was a great cop." I began to nod my head in agreement, but he held up his finger again. "But that's what helped make him such a miserable human being." "No, now listen. He was my brother and I loved him more than anyone, but he was devoid of certain feelings that would have made him a better family man. Having his work be the most important thing in his life did that to him. You have a chance to find some balance." He dropped his hand back onto the bed. "Balance, Christ, listen to me. I feel like some new age nut job." I placed my palm on his cheek. "You are a nut job, Ben. Stuck in the abyss of your own morass. Isn't that what you always used to say to me?" He gripped my fingers tightly. His eyes were fever bright, shards of glass in a stretched, pain-filled mask, but he smiled. Soon the nurse came to administer more pain meds, and he fell asleep, and I sat with him through the night. In between his narcotic drifting, we revisited his more memorable cases, some of which were solved, a naked dead guy in clown makeup, and some of which were never solved. A dead guy who was found in pieces scattered throughout Greenpoint and Williamsburg and Park Slope and Bed-Stuy. We cast into the ether familiar tales of other cops and families of cops, spinning out stories that I knew would never be told again unless I decided at some point to recount them to strangers, people who were not family. There was no more family except for Jackie. Mother, father, brother, all gone. He asked me to promise him one last thing, that upon arriving in the wilds of Texas, I would drive somewhere that was purely Dallas, a place that was immersed in the land's history, floating in the warp of its successes and stewed in the woof of its failures, and confront the beast. Hoist up both middle fingers, he had said, and tell the side-winding, belly-crawling, sand-blown fates of the West that the Polish cavalry had arrived. When I left him in the early morning hours, he was sleeping fitfully. That was 2 days ago.
Gorgeous. Truly, truly great. It's a great opening. It's great.
Thank you.
So I have many questions for you, but I'm going to start with one, and then we're going to just go down to people who have asked other questions, because you don't need to hear from me. I am curious about a couple things. One is about your huge success as a historical fiction writer. I just saw that you posted something about The Heretic's Daughters in its 14th printing, and I'm like, I can't even get a second printing. So congrats, that's amazing. But how was it that you came to switch genres? Just like, I also love that you wrote, I love how you have to preface everything now with contemporary, like you have to use the adjective contemporary.
Right.
So people don't get confused, you know? So I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point talking about the qualifier contemporary crime fiction, because, you know, many writers like Joe Lansdale writes crime, but they're historical fiction as well. So there's a particular expectation, I think, of writers who write contemporary crime. And as you said, I had written 3 works of historical fiction, and I was actually working on a 4th historical fiction novel, which was a sequel to The Outcast, which takes place in Texas after the Civil War. I love historical fiction. That's my go-to read, and I love doing research for historical fiction. But I got a call from a friend of mine, David Hale Smith, who was putting together an anthology for Akashic Publishers, and it was to be called Dallas Noir. And they have a whole series of books: Manhattan Noir, Brooklyn Noir, Chicago Noir, and it's a collection of short stories, crime stories written by local authors. So he called me up and he said, you know, I really like your work, and I was wondering if you'd like to submit a short story, but a crime story, and you can set it in any time you want, past, present, or future, but it has to be set in and around Dallas. And like any good fiction reader, I lied and said, sure, I probably have something, but how much time do I have? And I love reading crime fiction too. So he said, well, you got a couple of weeks. So I had never really plied my hand at crime fiction before. So the first call I made was to a cousin of mine that I'm very close to. We grew up together, and he just retired. He was a 30-plus year veteran of the Plano police force. He's worked narcotics undercover. He's worked vice undercover. He was on the SWAT team. I mean, this was a bad dude with a lot of experience. So I called him up and I dragged him to lunch, and I said, okay, you have to give me your worst. Tell me all the stories that we don't get to hear at family reunions. So I started, the more I started developing the character, and particularly Betty Rizek, I really felt a connection to her, because I grew up in Texas, but after college moved to New York for 20 years. So when I came back to Dallas, it felt like a foreign country to me. A lot had changed socially, but then again, a lot of things had not changed. And so I wanted to write a book from an outsider's point of view, and talk about all of the, from the sublime to the ridiculous things that happened in Texas. And so Betty kind of was formulated in my mind almost as of a piece. And I saw her very clearly. and started to work on the book and had a lot of fun with it. The main difficulty was doing research, because historical fiction, if you're writing historical fiction, historians, genealogists, people who love history will speak endlessly about it, and they love to share their knowledge. Active duty police officers, especially undercover police, cannot speak to you. So it was a challenge. I had to find a lot of retired police officers, and in particular, I formed a friendship with a retired female detective. She was the first detective that Dallas ever appointed. And she told some amazing stories, some of which I incorporated into the dime. So it was, it was kind of a challenge. I didn't know if I could do it, but I really do think that taking chances and working in an area or a genre that you're not completely comfortable with is really good for growth as a writer. I think taking those chances really keeps the sword sharpened, so it was a leap of faith in a way.
Wow. That's great. I have one other question actually that it's been burning my tongue to ask you, and then I will open up, I'll let other people ask their questions. I'm curious about the color red. Clearly, the color red features fairly significantly in this novel. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminded me, have you seen Marnie, Hitchcock's Marnie?
I have, but it's been many years since I've seen it.
I mean, her trigger is the color red, basically. And it's got me thinking about Betty and her hair. And so when I wrote Tell Me How the Scents Spell, and there was a mention of white as a sort of symbol, was red something that you did on purpose? Or did it come to you sort of in a trance like it came to me? I am curious, why the color red?
Well, red is a couple of reasons. Red is very primal. It stimulates the appetite for all kinds of things. My dad used to be in the restaurant business, and he said you could paint or wallpaper a restaurant any color as long as it's red, because it stimulates the appetite. Huh. And so I think, red is tied into, to passion, is tied into blood, the giving or the letting of blood. But also when I develop a character, especially a female character, I like to start off with as much headwind as possible against which those characters have to push. So I made Betty 6 feet tall, close to 6 feet tall, redheaded. There's a lot of prejudice against gingers, and she's a Yankee living in Dallas, and she's a lesbian. So I thought, all of that are things that she has to overcome. They're going to be prejudices, especially, not solely in the South, but sometimes very achingly is something you have to push back against in the South. And so making her redheaded is something that she's kind of like, she's what I imagine Boudica, the mythic Celtic warrioress that fought the Romans successfully. She's kind of an Amazon, and I wanted her to be striking physically, to be a force of nature, but also, again, these things that she's got going against her, being a female police officer, etc. And so I kind of piled on a lot of difficulties, a lot of weight that she was going to have to overcome.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's an incredibly smart and incredibly great piece of advice for anyone writing, actually. I mean, it really rings completely true. I mean, you spoke about being writing about an outsider. And I think, what do you think about outsider? Like, who are some of your favorite outsider? Did you base her on anybody with a specific sort of quality in mind? You said you wanted her to be an Amazonian, but is there someone out there who resembles Betty? Or did you just sort of think like, I want to write an outsider, here's my blueprint for an outside woman?
I wasn't picturing any real life person, although, you know, to me now, the closest to it, if Gal Gadot had red hair,
Right.
you know, she's tall, she's athletic, she's funny, and she's has a very attractive quality to men and to women, and that's sort of how I wanted Betty to be. You know, Betty's no pushover, but she really does have a soft spot in, you know, in rescuing the other outcasts. You know, she sees, she recognizes herself in the other outcasts. And the other thing was, so the first book, The Heretic's Daughter, takes place in during the Salem witch trials, and is based on my 9 times great grandmother, Martha Carrier, who was hanged as a witch. It's based on family lore and on true history. And my grandmother, in doing research for this, my maternal grandmother, who was a carrier, said to me, you know, sweetheart, there are no such things as witches, just ferocious women. And the idea of ferocious women in The Heretic's Daughter and The Traitor's Wife and The Outcasts, and in the Detective Betty series, the women, the female leads, are often fall outside of what's considered acceptable female behavior. You know, they're troublemakers. In The Outcasts, the main character is an unrepentant prostitute. And so the adage that good girls don't make history, I'm intrigued by women who buck the system, who swim against the tide, you know, rub against the grain. And maybe that's, you know, maybe that's a little self-revelatory. I mean, maybe I identify with that. Well, and I, you know, living in New York, I worked in 2 different fields of endeavor, 2 commercial fields of endeavor, the commodity exchange and as a contractor to the U.S. Department of Defense. Both of those industries are at best discouraging to women, and at worst actively hostile to women. And I did that for 20 years. And I think that extension, exercising those muscles, you know, in opposition to my work environment, I think has carried over into my developing strong female characters.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally clear. I also have to congratulate you on writing a novel that is completely and utterly, perhaps, I wouldn't say personality-wise, it's clear your personality shines forth, but it's not based on, you weren't a cop, you're not redheaded, you're not 6 feet tall. Maybe you are redheaded and maybe you are 6 feet tall.
In my dreams, I am.
I don't know, maybe you are, but I think it's really remarkable. A lot of fiction today, I mean, you know, a lot of fiction today is basically like, I was waiting for you to say I worked as a cop in New York. You know what I mean?
Well,
because it's not to like take away from autobiographical fiction, but I think I always love when I read something that it springs directly out of the writer's imagination. Like, I think that's so important in creating authentic works of fiction. Again, not to disparage autobiographical fiction, but I have a soft spot for these kinds of works that you write. So congrats.
Thank you. And we talked about this with your book, Tell Me How This Ends Well, that you were very clear about. You draw on elements from your personal life, but the characters aren't truly, you know, aren't of a whole anybody in particular. And I love the way when you first started talking, you said, let me just make it clear, Julian is not my dad.
Yep.
So, but I think that's important, that those elements of people that you've known and experiences that you've had can be channeled. And that's the great thing about fiction writing, is that, no, I'm not a cop. Maybe in my fantasy, I would have loved to have been a detective. But I think that with enough research and imagination, you can plumb those depths in very satisfying ways.
Yeah, and you totally have. It's great. Why don't we move on to a question from our participants?
Okay.
Is Doris Brogan? Can you unmute yourself, or Blake, can you unmute Doris?
See if I can find Doris.
She's right beneath me. Can you see her?
Let's see. Well, she might be somewhere. Doris, can you raise your hand? I'm looking for
There she is.
No, I'm the one whose face
Oh,
isn't
there she is. There's Doris. Okay, Doris sent us a question. Do you remember your question? Or do you want me to
Yes,
paste
I do. But
Okay.
if you have it written, read it.
All right. Do you want me to? I'll read it for Doris.
Go ahead, because I can't remember my exact wording. I've slept since then.
Okay, here's the exact wording, Kathleen. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
I love it when an ending surprises me. The ending of The Dime was a thrill ride and then some. What inspired it?
Ah.
Good
First of all,
question.
hello, Doris. I'm glad you're
Hi
here
there.
tonight. Hi.
Me too.
So the ending of The Dime, since you know, I'm going to be talking about the ending, so cover your ears for those of you who have not finished the book and don't want any plot spoilers. But you know, it's funny how sometimes when you're doing research for other projects, something is notable and you store it away in your memory and you kind of forget about it and you move on. When I was working on The Dime, I wanted to have something that was strange and unique and kind of brutal, you know, that and I didn't want to fall into a cliche. I wanted to do something unique that her captives, that Betty's kidnappers do to her to immobilize her. And the idea of her immobilization came from research I had done for the Outcast, that there were certain Native American tribes that when they took captives, they immobilized them by piercing the back of the leg through the Achilles tendon and hobbling them with strips of rawhide so they couldn't run away. It was brutal but very effective. And when I read it, I thought, ooh, I think I could use this at some point, but I couldn't fit it into the Outcast. When I was working on The Dime and thinking of the ending, I thought, ooh, I think I'll use this. So it was, but it wasn't just the physical act of her being hobbled so she couldn't run away from her kidnappers. Metaphorical point, and her Evangeline Roy, who was her main kidnapper, Evangeline Roy is the head of a cult, an evangelical cult that just happened to make money by selling drugs. She's very much Old Testament, and one of the quotes that she gives Betty often is that she has to submit herself to the will of God, and women have to submit themselves to their men, basically. I mean, in so many words. So Betty being hobbled and chained to a stone where that Bible verse was written, metaphorically and societally, it's how women have been hobbled and crippled by Old Testament patriarchal beliefs. So it was, you know, and at times I thought, was this too heavy-handed? But I wanted to make a point that, you know, one of the reasons I left Texas to begin with was because I wanted to escape certain stereotypes and certain limiting expectations. Moved to New York, was able to work for 20 years in the careers that I had chosen, and coming back, I was dismayed to see that a lot of these Stone Age limiting ideas about women and the place of women were still prevalent. So I put that in a book to make a point, you know.
Well, you know me, I love metaphor.
We didn't know that about you, or did we?
Kathleen probably knows that about
Kathleen
me.
does. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know you guys knew each other.
Yeah, we know each other.
Well, all right then.
So
Yeah, thank you for that question, Doris. Thank you.
Thanks, Doris.
you're welcome.
Is Steve Rogers around? Steve? Going once. Steve, going twice. Steve, are you on the other page? No. I'm going to ask this, Kathleen, because I think it's really fascinating and I think you'll enjoy answering it.
Okay.
Hi, Kathleen. What are your thoughts about this move in current popular culture to defund not only the police, but police shows and movies? Are novels like yours next to be denied by New York publishing houses? I would say yes, unfortunately, or maybe not. What do I know? Secondarily, do you have a little bit of a woke force field because your protagonist is gay? By the way, the company I work for supplies gas and diesel to Fuel City, so we appreciate the publicity. That's a really, I'm curious. I wanted to ask that about you. Like, where do you go from here? Do you go anywhere? Like, do you change anything?
You know, I think this is a really, really good question. And I think it's an important question for the genre. I think it's important societally. You know, we are in the midst of hopefully a seismic awakening and a recontextualizing justice served, justice denied, and those who serve and protect. And interestingly, I called my cousin and asked him that question because he's retired now. He's very glad that he's retired. But I said, what are your thoughts about this scrutiny of law enforcement? And he said, it's about fucking time.
Oh.
He worked in Plano, and he said that, first of all, they're better funded, they're better trained. He said Plano has not used chokeholds for 15 years. Now, not officially, there may be a few that, you know, in right. You know, in the heat of the moment, you know, let that slide. But officially, they're not to do that. And he feels as though, first of all, they're given all of this very expensive military-grade equipment. They're given very little training, and it bolsters this toxic, you know, the warrior cop image.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to diffuse a hostile situation, the cops often ramp it up. You know, it's an interesting fact that people always talk about how dangerous policing is. And it's true. Policing is a dangerous profession, but the statistics of labor, the federal government in their labor statistics rules being a law enforcement officer number 10 in a list of dangerous jobs. A forklift operator is injured on the job 4 times as much as a police officer. Now, again, it is dangerous, and you have dangerous situations where you maybe, you know, you pull somebody over on a traffic stop, you don't know if they're going to be armed, but using lethal force should be the last resort, not the first. And if some young kid is running away and you're firing at them, that is totally unjustified, completely unjustified. These cops that chase down kids, slam them to the pavement, grind their head into the cement. It's an excessive use of force. And there has to be a better winnowing procedure when cops go and apply to be police officers. The defunding, I mean, my cousin was all for the defunding, because defunding doesn't mean that you don't give the police officers proper equipment to, like the Kevlar vests and their sidearm, but they don't need rocket launchers. They don't, you know, they don't need the amount of firepower, and they're not being trained properly. So and my cousin, I'm really close to him, and I've heard some stories from him that he's taken to heart, and he's one of the good guys. And he was, you know, the first words out of his mouth were, it's time. We need to retrain We need to winnow out these jerks who, are Rambo wannabes. And we have to start a better dialogue. Now, Dallas police, for example, now our chief of police now is a female African-American woman, Renee Hall. They're trying diligently, she's trying diligently to change the proportion of people of color in the Dallas Police Department, but it's still primarily white, it's still primarily male. And
to stop you for 1 second, I heard an NPR story about where it doesn't make any difference the color of the police. I mean, it's so hard to know what would work. I'm actually very curious to hear what you think based on your fiction. Like, how would you change it? Like, what would you do?
And first of all, put a shitload more women in the force. Because if you notice, Betty only fires her gun one time. She may fire it again in the third book that I'm writing, but she works her way out of a situation using her intellect, using her wiles, using negotiating skills. Women use their firearms far less than men do, male cops. And that's just statistically a fact. And I think that women work very well in hostage negotiation situations. They work very well in domestic situations, because that's probably 60% of what police officers respond to are domestic disputes. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times that's fueled to a violent extreme with drugs and alcohol. But female cops have just historically been much better at diffusing tense situations. And I think we need a lot more women on the force.
What about, this might be off topic and you don't have to answer this, but why do you think that the chief of police in Atlanta resigned? What was that about?
You mean in response to?
Sorry, this is not about your book. We don't have to talk about it, but I was curious to hear, yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that, so there has been a police force is a paramilitary force. They're paramilitary. They have ranks, they have a hierarchy, they're supposed to be disciplined and respond to the orders from up above. They're also a closed society, and some of it is important because, you have, especially for undercovers, you have to protect them. But there's this, it's like they're, the Masonic Lodge, where they have secret handshakes and everything. The idea that cops cannot be scrutinized except by members of their own, I think is going to have to change. And I think some police forces are starting to look at the possibility of bringing in outside independent civilian eyes that can make a judgment. Is this person, is this man or woman mentally fit, emotionally resilient, and physically strong enough to do his or her job? I think that the brotherhood, sisterhood mentality has got to change. Until that changes, I think there's going to be a lot of cover up.
Do you think Betty would have resigned if she had been chief of police? Did you hear me?
Yes. Sorry. No, I think that's a really good question. And I'm thinking about that. Because the storyline is still, even in the third book, it's back a few years. It's 2014. And I would have to say, because I was thinking today, I was out for my walk and I was thinking, okay, Betty has been, in the third book, she's been promoted to sergeant. So she's kind of moving up the ladder. Would she be true to her moral compass? Because in the burn, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, the burn, there are several instances of corruption that she's confronted with. And she says, no, I can't go there. There's certain things that I can turn a blind eye to, but I can't, you know, stealing drugs, stealing money, certain things at the line. And she would rather, I think she probably would. I would like to think that she would resign. If she couldn't change it from the inside, I think she would walk away. I think she would have to.
I see private investigator Betty Rizek in book 5. Or
Well,
book 6.
I'm glad you said that. Because that's one way, you know, and there are a lot of private investigators who start off as law enforcement, you know, within the force.
Yeah.
I actually, in this third book, introduced 2 wild and crazy female PIs into the third book that they're helping Betty with some things. And they get away with a lot of stuff that police officers can't. But yeah, that's funny. I mean, that's certainly another avenue. And if the series goes forward past the third book, you know, about 2/3 of the way through the third book, if the series goes on, that's going to have to be, you know, a creative decision. Where does Betty go after this?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, part of that question too is also like, what do you think is, you know, going to happen with publishing? I mean, I love this blog or this website called Crime Reads. I'll put a link to it. Does everyone check out Crime Reads?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion, of course, just about what's the future of crime fiction, you know, because I think Maggie in the comments, she said it's interesting that a lot of crime fiction involves police corruption and brutality. And then Robin, who's covered this beat, I guess the police in her beat when she was reporting, you know, having to understand the inner workings and how those things are evolving. So do you have any sense, Kathleen, for maybe people who are writing crime fiction, who are here, you know, to his question about that part of publishing or what's going to happen?
Yeah, you know, so there are a couple of layers in that question. It's a complex issue because publishers are handmaidens to the marketplace, and if they think something is selling, you know, they're going to be pulled in that direction. I think there is a shift. For example, I think, and rightly so, with publishers and in conferences, there's going to be highlighting more authors of color, Latino, African American, from their experience. Like, so when the Dime was nominated for the Edgar Award, there were 5 nominations, and three of the nominations were female. You know, I was one of 3 females, and the winner of the Edgar Award that year was Attica Locke. Fantastic writer, and I thought that was really very inspiring and uplifting, that, you know, that through this crack in the door that other voices are going to be featured and heard. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how those voices, because we're going to be looking at you know, crime, private investigators, law enforcement officers, detectives, etc., through a different lens, because the experience is going to be different. You know, my experience of police officers, yeah, Alexandra said Lubert is fantastic. It is great. She's wonderful, and deserved the Edgar. But I think we're going to be seeing different sides of the story. Marketing trends in the publishing industry, it's malleable, it changes. So I don't know what that's going to do, you know, in terms of, I don't want to try to prejudge, you know, cops aren't popular right now, so I'm going to start writing about Betty Rizek. I will write the character and the story that I see as authentic, but I can only see it through a limited lens, you know, and through my own experiences. But I
Right.
do try to, I mean, I think part of our jobs as writers is to listen, you know, to talk to as many different people with as many different backgrounds and experiences as possible, and listen to their perspective, listen to how they see things, through which lens they're looking at it. And I think that's going to make for better writing. It's going to make for more interesting stories, and it's going to make for more impactful social change too.
Great answer. Very illuminating.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. We have a question from John Viers, V-I-A-R-S is John. There you are,
Oh, I
John.
see John. There's
John
John.
John V down in the bottom near DG Weaver.
Yes,
John.
there we
you
go. There's John.
Hi.
Hi, John. Would you like to ask Kathleen your brilliant question too?
Sure. Well, I have two kind of process questions. One is I absolutely loved your fluid use of first person present tense. How hard was that to make it flow as well as it did through both of these books? I know it gave me tachycardia reading it, but it was a very pleasant tachycardia. It made everything urgent. It was a major factor in the flow of these books. But did you have any problems with it? Are there other things that are harder because of writing with that? And then I have a question about your choice of sites for your scenes.
Sure. Thanks for that question, John. And it's a good one because I had written in the first person past tense, you know, the heretic's daughter. This is the first time that I had written first person present. And after I started doing it, there were moments when I thought, oh, I really have done it now. I've really limited myself because, you know, so much of good storytelling is being able, you know, as the omniscient viewer, that you get to jump from character to character and scene to scene. So it was a challenge to keep it interesting, and it put all of the burden on Betty. So I had to have a robust enough character to withstand. She had to be strong enough to withstand all of the action being focused on her. But I think it really helped me in my learning curve, building a more substantive characters, someone who's multidimensional, someone who is not all one thing, but a component of a lot of different pieces. I mean, she's a badass woman, but she's also got a soft heart. She rescues orphans. She's self-deprecating. She understands that she can be a real ass sometimes. So I think it was a good growth development for me as a writer to be able to be challenged to write a character that was strong enough to withstand that. And I was really I fell in love with her. I loved the character, and I've gotten more comfortable with first person present as I've gone along. To me also, it seemed kind of cinematic when you're, you know, because it's written first person present, right? Well, the character's speaking, but it's in the present tense. And so I think subconsciously, because this was all new territory for me, and I'm kind of a visual person, I think it helped cement the course of action to put it in the present tense. It was more cinematic. I don't know if that makes sense.
We've come a long way since Bret Easton Ellis, I think, because this really worked. The other one has to do with sites, where the settings for the scenes. I'm new to Dallas, and so I didn't know if these places were real. And Fuel City, I believe, comes fairly early in the book. And so I said, Christ, is this real? And so I've got Google Earth going on over here as a side by side with it. And then I realized that most of your settings were actual places in Dallas.
Right.
And I
Right.
thought, okay, I'm new here, so maybe I should go visit those places. And
Yeah.
of course, not the strip bar. I just want to make that clear. But that this is it was fascinating to me. So my question is, what made you decide to use a real place versus a place that isn't real, which I think you had a few of in your books as well? And did you have any issues like having to get permission to use all of that detail about those places?
You know, one thing I did remember about Texas, even though I had been away for 20 years, was that Texans have incredible pride of place. They put a lot of their identity into a favorite bar, you know, the Fort Worth Rodeo, remember the Alamo. I mean, it's almost, you know, some Texans get kind of pugnacious about their, you know, their pridefulness of these places. And I knew that a lot of Texans, Dallasites would be reading the book, and I thought it would be fun to put some of these real places. And Fuel City, I mean, it sounds, you know, when I was talking about the sublime to the ridiculous, it sounds like I just made this place up, because it's a car wash, a taco stand, and they have a pen with longhorn bulls. And, you know, I mean, it's just, and the mix of people, you get off-duty cops and you get soccer moms, and you get, I mean, it is sort of a microcosm of modern day Dallas. You get a little bit of everything. And that, I knew once I'd seen it, that was going to be the place setting for Betty to, you know, she promised Uncle Benny to hoist both middle fingers and say the Polish cavalry has come. It was sort of her Alamo in a way. It's where she was going to make a stand. And then I just had great fun, you know, talking about places like Norma's Cafe or Gas Monkey Bar and Grill. You should go to Gas Monkey Bar and Grill. It's a riot. It's, you know, you have grandmas and grandpas sitting next to bikers. It's a wild place. So I had a lot of fun, and I sent the book, a copy of the book, to Richard, who's the owner of the Gas Monkey. He's the one that had the show. He was thrilled. I think that people are thrilled to have the real, you know, their real place in a work of fiction. So I got no pushback from any of it.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. Great question. Thank you very much for that, and great answers too. Moving right along. Let me ask one of Alexandra's questions. Alexandra, would you like to ask one of your questions?
I guess, I mean, we were gabbing a little bit about, because I'm from New York, so I took extra pleasure in just some of the great New York, like, you know, the Subway series in the opening part of the book, which is the Great World Series, of course, between the Mets and the Yankees.
Right.
I mean, I guess what it was kind of an interesting situation that Betty had to kind of evoke these two worlds within herself, you know what I mean? And you do a pretty deft job of that, Kathleen, especially it is because it is in present, you know, first person present tense. So I don't know, what was it like to try to have her to be, you know, to evoke both her background in Brooklyn and her present reality in Dallas, and have those two worlds kind of vying within her? Just putting that out there.
Yeah, no, it's important, because it's an important part of Betty. You know, she is a New Yorker through and through. Her father was a cop, her brother was a cop, her uncle was a cop, her grandfather was a cop, and her identity, really, first and foremost, is as a New Yorker, and that's probably what gives her kind of brash, in your face responsiveness to things. But what I've done as kind of as a device to help to fill in the gaps of Betty's past life is that the beginning of all three books are flashbacks to an experience in New York. So, the dime started with she'd only been a cop for, a few months. In the burn, she goes, the first chapter is back in time, and it talks about why the events that happened that caused her brother to commit suicide. And I've alluded, there's no plot spoiler because I've alluded to that in the dime. I talk about that he kind of, in essence, took a long walk off of a short pier. But I go back and explain why he did that. And the idea of the second book, the central idea of corruption, is addressed very early on because her brother and father were both corrupt cops. And it was a very formulative part of her her identity as a cop, and I do the same thing in the third book. There's another flashback, and it's a series of events that happened the night before September the 11th. So it's before the night before the towers come down. And so that to me was really fun because then I got to go back to New York too. And I got to revisit, places. And it's kind of a love letter to New York. I grew up in Texas, but spent 20 years working, striving and thriving in New York City. And it's kind of a love letter because I don't think I could ever live there again, but I love the city. I love the people. I love going back to visit. So that's why, New York is a very important part of Betty.
No, that's great. I love how you use the flashback. That's great. So there's always that aspect of her brought to life and kind of held in relief against what's happening in the present moment. That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's 8. I was wondering if maybe we could change gears a bit and talk about your writing process.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Would you like that?
Sure. I would love that.
Is that something of interest? I don't know if it's a great question, but I do have a question. Are you a pantser or an outliner? An outliner?
Both. So for The Heretic's Daughter, which was my first book that I wrote, and I didn't start writing that book until I was in my 40s, right? I mean, I'd always scribbled, but I was working, 7 to 7, 6 days a week in New York, and in different commercial adventures. And so I didn't know. The last time I'd taken structured writing classes was in college, which was back when they were still lighting the classrooms with whale oil lamps. I mean, it was way long ago. So I had to relearn how to write. And writing a novel in the long form is very different than writing a short story. It's a very particular process, and it took me 5 years to do it. And I had to kind of teach myself, but I picked a story that was very well known historically. All of the pieces, beginning, middle, and end, I had a scaffolding. So in a way, as a new writer, I wasn't inventing things out of the thin air. I had my storyline, beginning, middle, and end. So for a young writer, even though I'm fictionalizing a lot of this true life history, I have it all right there. So I bumbled into having, I had an outline laid out for me. And so that really helped me, especially as a new versioning writer, to have that blueprint. The second book, the follow-up book, I had bits and pieces of it, but it was more pantsing it. I mean, I just kind of let the story develop. The Outcast, the same way. And I think, David, didn't you say you had a dream about something, that you had a question and it was answered for you in a dream? Did you say something about that?
I may have. I forgot to define pantser versus outliner. Pantser is a writer who writes from the seat of his or her pants.
Right.
And an outliner is someone who outlines meticulously. I'm a total pantser. I can't outline to save my life. Kathleen is a hybrid, it sounds like, right? You're a hybrid, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's although I have to say that crime fiction, one of the so historical fiction is one thing, and it was more just a lot of times free flow kind of creation. But crime fiction, when I was talking to seasoned crime writers, one of the best pieces of advice I got from someone was, once you have your story idea, your basic idea, go ahead and write your ending as soon as you can, because that's going to help set the pace, and it's going to keep you from going off the rails, because in crime, pacing is so important. I talk about historical fiction as having more of a slow burn. You're along for the ride. You're along for the beauty of the descriptiveness of the language and the characters. So I think maybe there's a more forgiving pace in historical fiction. Not always, but that's the kind of fiction I like. But in crime fiction, the expectation is bang out of the box and fast and furious.
Right.
And so having the ending can change. You can say, well, this is not going to work for logistical reasons, or it doesn't make much sense. But having an ending pretty early on has helped me in keeping on the track, keeping focus on the story, that it doesn't, just get off into too many tangents.
I'm curious also, sorry, did I just cut you off? It's
No,
hard to
go
tell.
ahead.
Sometimes I lag, so if I cut you off, I apologize.
No, that's fine.
Like today, I was writing a scene, and because I'm an answer, hey, this is what's going to happen. You write. I've always heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but writers, we don't discover things within our own work, then it won't be interesting to a reader either. And so today I found that, this character appears nowhere. Why does this character appear out of nowhere? So I'm just curious, when you were writing The Dime, and it does move at a clip, did you cut stuff out, or did it just come out that way?
The Dime was yeah, I mean, some of it I had a basic outline, and somebody asked, Robin asked, do you create timelines? And I did. I created a timeline, and I had a calendar. I printed out a calendar of the months that I was writing about, and I started storyboarding in that calendar. Today, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. So that I had a tangible timeline of action. And one of the things I had to learn was I'd never written a series before either. Standalone books, they're a world, you're world building, and it's a world unto itself, and then you set it aside when you're done and you go on to something else. One of the things I didn't really understand that I had to learn, from my editor and in the process, is that you should be able to read each book stand alone. However, you have to look at the meta picture. You're writing the timeline could go over the course of years. And so it's like playing three-dimensional chess. That was a challenge for me. That was something new that I had to learn. But timelines, at least for the Betty series, is really helping me a lot. Because there are a lot of action items that are going on behind the scenes that I have to be able to pull back in. I have to pull that thread back in and say, oh, we're waiting for pathology reports, or, oh, we're waiting for forensics. And so that visual map helps me. I didn't do that until I started writing the crime series.
I mean, it seems incredibly well plotted. I mean, I'm sure all
Thank
your
you.
books, I haven't read your other books, so I don't know, but I'm sure they're also equally as well plotted. But
Thank you.
this one, it never dips. You know, there's some books that just kind of sag at a certain point. But this one, like, really keeps the pace. No, I mean, it's great. It's very interesting. Alexandra had a question. Actually, there's a question. Maggie Pinson, are you around, Maggie? Maggie? Say hello. You just asked me this.
Hi. I don't have
Hi.
a either. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Maggie, would you like to ask your question to Kathleen?
Sure. I want to tell you first that I really was impressed by Betty's memory of this when her Uncle Benny took her to make a phone call, her last phone call for a dime, and how that was then woven into her escape in the present.
Right.
And I wondered two things about that. First, I wondered where that story came from. And secondly, I wondered if that was the origin of the name for the book, sort of.
Right. You know, that scene where she's been kidnapped and she's dreaming of Benny. In several of my books, and including the Detective Betty series, I like the glimmer of the supernatural, not heavy-handed, not drowning in it. You know, it's not Stephen King territory, but I like the idea, you know, that there's stranger things in heaven and earth, and Betty, through all of the books, has this connection with Uncle Benny that borders on, you know, this incredibly close bond with him. And he comes to her when she's sleeping or when she's running, when she's in an altered state. And he often gives her the answers to things that she doesn't, at least not consciously aware of.
Yeah.
That scene with when she's a child and Uncle Benny walking, that just came to me. That's one of the few times when it was purely inspirational. I know I knew I needed a flashback, and I called a friend who lived in Brooklyn, and I said, "Where'd you go to school? You know, what did the school look like? What were the streets it was on, and what were the shops?" And she told me about walking to school, and as she was talking to me about it, the whole scene just came to me. The whole scene just came to me, and the original title. I'm terrible with titles. I come up with a title, and the publisher always changes it. The original title was not The Dime, but the editor suggested that because he said that was such a pivotal scene, you know, and it has several references, like when you drop a dime on someone, or a dime bag of dope, or, you know, it just became the central thing.
What was the original title? Hello.
Oh,
come on.
I honestly, I don't remember, because we went through so many titles. I remember The Heretic's Daughter. I had titled it The Daughters of the Arabella, and, you know, nobody knew what the Arabella was. So I bow my head to wiser, more creative heads where titles are concerned.
Why? That's a great title. What's wrong with The Daughters of Arabella?
Well, because nobody knew what the Arabella was, even though that was the ship that the Puritans came over on. Anyway,
That's
they
great.
like.
I didn't know they came over on the Arabella. That's great.
But you love the title.
I like The Heretic's Daughter too. It's a great title. So it's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
So
Thank you.
yeah, so The Dime, it just, you know, it just became, it was short and to the point, and it really touched on the pivotal aspect of the book. So
yeah, no, it's a great title.
I'm always interested too, like, are these books under option? Is there going to be anything with any kind of television or movie? Because they are so cinematic, and they feel like that they would just naturally adapt to the screen. Is there anything going on there?
yes, well, saw The Vagaries of Hollywood. So I had a film agent who a copy of the dime, an advance copy, and within 2 weeks, he had a film option with 20th Century Fox, produced by Matt Reeves and J.J. Abrams. Matt Reeves did all the, or did several of the Planet of the Apes movies. I mean, he's, you know, I mean, it was a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
So they wrote a pilot script, the Gayton brothers, who wrote Hell on Wheels, which had 6 very successful seasons on AMC. It was kind of a Western, but they love action stuff. They loved the book. They wrote a script. They went into pre-production. We had a pretty good sized budget to go into filming. And a few weeks, and I think they'd even gone into, they'd started looking at casting. A few weeks before they were going to nail things down, Disney bought 20th Century Fox and put everything that wasn't already in production. In other words, if they had a minute in the can, they would have let it roll. But they put it on hold because they have their own projects and their own people. And so it just fell apart.
Disney.
So that, yeah, Disney, boo, boo. So, but you know, this happens all the time. You know, I hear stories all the time. You know, Dan Simmons, who's a little brown author who did The Terror. I love Dan Simmons' books. You know, he does a lot of supernatural stuff. And it took about 12 years from the time it was first optioned to the time it was filmed. So yeah. It's, you know, you never know what people are looking for. You can have a book out for years and somebody discovers it and goes, wow, this is really timely. I love it. Or more cynically, they're looking to copy something that's already successful. So, you know, there's so many intangibles. And so, you know, maybe it'll be optioned again, maybe it won't. I kind of have to leave it out there in the cosmos and it'll happen or it won't.
It will. It'll probably be.
Yeah, I think it will.
We'll see, David.
It'll probably be by Disney.
I'll boomerang back.
The irony of fiction. It'll probably be by Disney.
Does anybody in the audience have any questions before we wrap up? We've kind of gone through all of a lot of the questions that came in were actually answered in some of the other questions. So we didn't actually ask all the questions because Kathleen answered most of them.
Yeah, sorry. If we didn't get to your question, it was my call basically, and you can blame me.
But we got them answered, which is great. So does anybody have a question for Kathleen before we wrap it up and prepare? Phil, your hand is raised. Do you have a question, Phil? Let's unmute Phil here. I think Phil's got a question. What do you got for us, Phil?
I was just curious. At the time that you created the character of Betty Rizek, were you familiar with Julie Smith's Skip Langdon?
No.
Yeah, are you familiar with her now? You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Someone had after the fact. Someone had mentioned. Is it the author lives in California? Is it California?
The characters are, the novels are all set in New Orleans, and Skip Langdon is a 6-foot-tall female detective in the New Orleans Police Department. So it raises obvious associations.
And also to, what's Dan Brown's guy? Isn't he Langdon also?
Beats me. But I was thinking specifically the fact that this was a female 6-foot-tall police detective from a southern city, it sounded very similar. Well,
I had not. I was not familiar with that character. I think, you know, for me, I just imagined someone very, very imposing. And the woman stories, the woman I was talking about, that was the first detective that Dallas had, and this was like in the mid 80s when she was made detective. Her name is Marilyn Hay, and she's quite she's a very imposing woman. She's very tall. I think she's close to 6 feet tall. And even though she doesn't, you know, she doesn't really look like I imagined Betty. She had said to me that her imposing size and height was really worked to her advantage when she was, when she was on the force, and there were even fewer women on the force at that time. So I guess I think that's sort of what I was molding Betty on, is that I wanted her to be very imposing physically, a real force of nature.
And she
Well, it almost feels like that you just picked up the Skip Langdon series, because I think Julie Smith has let them go at this point. They were mostly in the 90s, and she's taken up publishing at this point. But you might find it interesting if you look back at it.
I will. Thank you for bringing that up. I love reading crime fiction now with strong female characters. I'm totally addicted.
Yeah, the other crime fiction predecessor that you might be interested in is that are you familiar with Bill Pronzini and his character, who's usually referred to as unnamed because his name is never brought up in any of the books? And,
no, I'm not.
There's one of I can't remember the name of it now, but there's one of the Bill Pronzini novels that involves his unnamed is imprisoned in a place, and he never sees his captors, and the whole thing is worked out primarily with how he works out getting free. And it's really an interesting novel. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's been 30 years since I read it. But
right. Yeah. No, it sounds really interesting, almost like The Prisoner.
Yeah, very much like that. But I think more interesting than The Prisoner. Bill Pronzini is really interesting writer.
I will have to check that out. I'll have to Google the author. Somebody said, I want beer and a burger with Betty at Adair's. Me too. I think maybe once the plague has passed, maybe we can have a reunion at Adair's.
I would like
that. Becca says meet there in 5 months. Good idea, Bethany. Becca's like, yeah, I'll meet you there in 5 months. That sounds great.
I'll be there too.
Yay.
So I feel like I don't see any other hands raised.
I've got a question.
Oh yeah, go for it, Kimberly. Yeah.
James Earl is one of my favorite characters.
Oh yeah.
He's extremely strong and yet so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Was there anybody in particular that you fashioned that character on, or was he just someone that you wanted to? He was a good balance in the plot and story.
Yeah. So Betty is so strong and strident at times. Sometimes her manner is unforgiving or combative, that I felt that she needed to have people in her circle that would soften that. Her partner Jackie, who's a pediatric radiologist, certainly much softer and kind of, polishes off Betty's rough edges. Benny, I love the fact that she had these men in her life that were that kind of filled in the nurturing role for her. And we don't know until the third book why that is, when I talk a lot about the relationship with her mother. But James Earl, I think the most beautiful people are broken. The most beautiful people are the ones who've suffered and are empathetic to other people's suffering. So James Earl is another kind of voice of her conscience, kind of a softening, and his brokenness is very, to me, it's very beautiful. Thank you for that question, Kimberly.
The most beautiful people are broken. I like that quote. That's great.
Yeah.
Kathleen,
get that
you're a
tattoo,
dime.
Gemini
You're a
Ink.
doll and a dime. Thank you so much for this. Does anyone else? I'm sorry, Blake. This is your thing.
No. I was just saying I love that saying. I was going to get the tattoo at Gemini Ink because Alexandra said that sometimes you can reach for a tattoo parlor. The most beautiful people are broken.
I'm going to get inertia.
Yeah, that's an inside joke. Because apparently I don't know what inertia means. But thank you all for being here. Kathleen, thank you for being here. Thank you all. We are going to meet again on July 8th, where we will read and discuss with Kathleen the follow-up to The Dime. It will be The Burn. And
Right.
this one's going to be moderated by another Dallas author, crime writer, Heather Harper Ellett. She's the author of Ain't Nobody Nobody. So if you scroll up in the comments, you can see a link at Interrobang to get both The Burn if you haven't yet read it, and also Heather Harper Ellett's Ain't Nobody Nobody. So it should be a lot of fun. And so thank you all for being. Anything else, Alexandra, Kathleen, or David?
I just want to thank everybody. Alexandra, I wanted to thank Blake and David for helping to shepherd this. I think it was a fantastic idea and just what the doctor ordered. And I'm so appreciative of being included in this. And David, thank you so much, darling, for your questions and helping me through this.
Please. It was nothing. You're a doll. It was easy. I don't know why I'm talking like an old Jewish man, but I am.
You've had me madly writing notes.
Yeah, Kathleen,
Sorry.
this was awesome. I'm so happy that you were a part of this.
Thank you.
And we'll
This
be
is
another
great.
part of this. Hurrah!
Yeah, July 8th. Well, thanks everybody, and we will hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
This was super fun. Yeah, great.
Collaborators, stick around.